Hi, everybody. This is Lucy Salcido-Carter. I'm the Policy Director of Cal Nonprofits, and welcome to the webinar on PPP Loan Forgiveness. If you're logging on now, you're a little bit early, but we're glad to have you. It would be great for you to go to the chat box down at the bottom of your screen and put in your name, the name of your organization, and your location. That way people can see who all are on the webinar. We are expecting quite a few participants. So as you get on, you can go down to your chat box and let us know who you are. And it's great to see who all is joining the webinar. We have Karen from 0800. We've got Maureen from Benicia Historical Museum. So as you join the webinar, please feel free to put your name, organization, and location in the chat box so everybody can see who all is on the webinar together. So we have Krista from Arts Council, Napa Valley, Doug from Home Furnishings, we've got Kavita, Controller at Catholic Charities, Reverend Mary Mitchell at CSL Reading. We've got Martha from Tender Care Community Clinic. Again, this is Lucy with Cal Nonprofits, and this is the PPP Loan Forgiveness webinar. We'll be starting in just a couple of minutes. You're a little bit early. And while we are waiting to begin, it would be great to have you all put your name, organization, and location in the chat box so you can see who all is on the webinar. And we'll start with the content in just a couple of minutes. Please, oh, I see Alexander. Let's see, it's moving so quickly, it's hard to keep up with it. We've got Laurel from Beyond Differences, San Rafael, California. Thank you for so many people logging on in the chat. Let's see, we've got Wendy from Center for Nonprofit Leadership in Nevada County. We've got Tali from County of Ventura, Chris from Sonora Watch. As you're joining, we're a little bit early still. We'll be starting in just a couple of minutes. You can put your name, organization, and location in the chat box, and we'll start at just about a minute after 11. We're giving people a chance to get on. I see Jamie from Benicia. We've got Nancy, Girl Scouts of San Gorgonio. We've got Maybell from Goodwill Industries. It's great to see all of you logging on here. We've got Annette from UPAC San Diego, Barbara from Exceptional Minds. So again, we'll be starting in just a couple of minutes, but while we're waiting to begin, it would be great to have you put your name, organization, and location in the chat box, and we'll get started in just a few minutes with the PPP Loan Forgiveness webinar. Let's see, I see Mary O'Malley from Sierra Mental Wellness, Build Futures, Lee from Gang Alternatives Program. We've got Daniel from Hayes Accounting Solutions. We've got Sue Sigler. We've got Rianne from Shasta Regional Community Foundation, Keith from CrossPulse. We have got Barbara from Los Sensontles in San Pablo. Again, my name is Lucy, and I'm the Policy Director at Cal Nonprofits, and we'll be starting with the PPP Loan Forgiveness webinar in just a couple of minutes. But while everybody is getting on, we are expecting a big group today. Please feel free to go to the chat box down at the bottom of your screen, and you can put your name and organization and location in there. And that way you all can see who is on the webinar as well. I see Kevin from Clergy and Laity United, Mary from Pacific Forest Trust, Scott from Point Foundation, Tim Dodds Happy Valley Conference Center. A lot of people from all around the country, or all around the state. We've got Peter from Laguna Art Museum, Patty C5 LA, Robert Casa of Los Angeles. So again, we'll start in just a couple of minutes. Feel free to put your name and organization and location in the chat box, and we'll get started with the PPP Loan Forgiveness webinar in just a minute or two. It's great to see so many names and organizations here. We've got Alan from Pasadena Senior Center, Pat Let's see, we've got Andrea from SYRCL, Nevada City. The names are scrolling so fast. Valley Jewish Community Center. We've got Save the Bay, Catholic Charities of Santa Clara County, Pomona Hope. It's great to see so many of you joining. So again, in just a minute, we'll get started. But while we're getting ready to start, it would be great to have you put your name, organization, and location in the chat box. And we'll begin in just a minute. Mitch from CIF, National Council of Jewish Women. We have Bay Area Bioscience Education Community, South Bay Children's Health Center, League of Women Voters, an amazing and varied group from all around the state. Happy Valley Conference Center in Santa Cruz. It's great to see so many names. I can barely read them. They're flipping through so fast here. So again, we'll get started actually in just a minute or two, but you can continue to put your name and organization and location in the chat box. And why don't we go ahead and get started now? This way you can continue to see who all is joining. So again, this is the PPP Loan Forgiveness webinar, Tips and Tools from the SBA. We're going to be hearing very soon from an SBA expert on the PPP. And I want to just give you a little bit of information, housekeeping information before we begin. If you have any kind of technical issues, you'll see below on this slide a number that you can call in and a webinar ID number that you can use to participate in the webinar via audio if for some reason your video doesn't work. So that number is 669-900-6833 and the webinar ID 811-9144-2052. You might just want to jot it down just so you have it in case there are any technical challenges and you need to join the webinar that way. So it's great to see so many of you continue to put your names and organizations in the chat box. That would be great. So, okay. Again, I'm Lucy Salcido Carter. I'm the Policy Director of Cal Nonprofits. I'll be moderating the webinar today. The webinar is PPP Loan Forgiveness, Tips and Tools from the SBA. Let's see, we've got a little more housekeeping I want to go over. So here you'll see on the screen, there are two boxes we're going to want you to use. One is the chat box, which you've already been using and putting in your names and organizations. If you have any kind of technical issues, any trouble participating in the webinar, please use that box to let us know and we'll help you. And if you have any questions about the content of today's webinar, we'd like for you to put those questions in the Q&A box. And you can see that you've got the chat box down below. And then if you keep looking over to your right, you'll see the Q&A box. I already see that there's some questions there, so that's great. So we'll use those two boxes that way. We've gotten over 200 questions before the webinar began, so we will take as many of those questions as we can. We won't get to all of them, but we will send some follow-up information to you with the recording of the webinar, the slides from our presenter, who will get introduced in just a minute, and some links for you with additional information. So you can look forward to getting that after the webinar. So we are going to move on now. Let's go back to the speaker slide. And I would like to turn it over to Jan Masaoka, the CEO of Cal Nonprofits, to make a few comments.
Thanks, Lucy. Thanks to everybody, especially Julia Clowes, who will be talking in just a few minutes, and to our tech support team today, Christina Dragonetti and Karina Paredes-Lazola. And to let you know, we're expecting 1,200 people on today's of a lot of interest to a lot of people. I think you all know that California Association of Nonprofits, we say Cal Nonprofits for short, is kind of a policy alliance, a kind of chamber of commerce for nonprofits with more than 10,000 members. And a lot of what we do is improve how government and nonprofits work together. And especially how we do that is by bringing government officials, whether they're elected or staff, into direct contact with nonprofits so that we nonprofits can hear directly from government people how they're thinking about things and what the processes are, and also so that they can hear directly from nonprofits what our concerns are, what are working for us, and what isn't working for us. So, we estimate that about a third of eligible nonprofits in California applied for and received PPP, Paycheck Protection Program loans. And I think, all of us know from our own organizations and from talking to so many others how incredibly important this has been in preserving jobs and preserving nonprofits and preserving services to our communities. But now, of course, a lot of us are turning our attention to the issue of loan forgiveness. And I want to say that nonprofits, one of the things we really appreciate about SBA is that they've been under enormous pressure. They have been very flexible and their staff has just worked so hard and been so honest and candid with nonprofits about the different challenges going on. And from a policy point of view, because we're really basically a policy coalition, we really are glad that this time compared to the 2008 recession, that nonprofits are being recognized as being small businesses in addition to being part of the supply chain for services, care for the environment, and the arts. So it's great to see us working directly with the SBA. So I think that's another important part of our, I hope, kind of growing relationship with the Small Business Administration. So just one last thing I wanted to say before we go on, and that is that, we're going to be also learning a lot from your questions and comments in both the chat box and Q&A. So we know we're not going to get each person's question answered, but please, write in and say the kinds of things that are of concern or of interest to you. That helps all of us, including our SBA friends, learn for the future. So welcome to so many people, and back to you, Lucy.
Okay, thank you, Jan. All right, with that, I want to introduce Julie Clowes. Julie has served in a number of leadership positions at the Small Business Administration, or the SBA, and is currently the District Director of the San Francisco District Office, where she oversees the delivery of SBA programs in 14 Northern California counties. Julie's also a nonprofit leader. She serves as a board member at the Colorectal Cancer Alliance. So with that, please want to welcome Julie and turn it over to you to get started.
Thank you, Lucy, and thank you, Jan, for the introduction. So hello to everybody out there. I'm going to try to share my screen really quickly and talk at the same time, which sometimes goes well. But I appreciate the opportunity to come speak with you all today. I know you have lots and lots of questions, and I will try to get to as many of them as possible. There are some things I might not be able to answer, some things that might either require further research or some specific one-on-one conversations, but we'll do our best. I'm going to give you a little bit of background and information, and then we'll talk about the Flexibilities Act a little bit, because I did make some changes, and I just want to make sure everybody's aware. And then we'll talk a little bit more about forgiveness of the PPP loan specifically. So, as Jan prefaced in her remarks, SBA normally is actually prohibited from lending to nonprofits. It's actually the statutory definition of a small business states that it must be a for-profit enterprise. So it's nice to see that during this time of extreme need across all business sectors, that Congress recognized that, and through the CARES Act actually made some exceptions so that we could work with nonprofits directly. So this financial assistance slide that's up, if it's not up, let me know, but hopefully you're all seeing it. It's just kind of a summary of everything that's COVID-19 related. Only some of these apply to nonprofits. One thing that does, and I'm just going to point it out, is disaster lending. Disaster lending is the one time that SBA works with everybody out there. So if your nonprofit has a pre-existing, I'm talking prior to COVID-19 disaster loan, just so you know that loan, those payments on that loan were deferred. That was automatically happened. It should have been reflected in your monthly notice. If for whatever reason that hasn't happened, you can contact us and we'll make sure that you're getting that deferment. But from the loan side, the two programs of which nonprofits are eligible for is obviously the PPP and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. That's the one directly from SBA. Both programs are still open and available. So if you're on this webinar because you're just interested in some background and hadn't yet applied for either PPP or economic injury, that is still possible. So I encourage you to go submit an application. PPP will end, the new sunset date is August 8th. And economic injury disaster loan is staying open until we exhaust all the funds. Just a quick comparison, because this actually comes up in a lot of the questions and even some of the forgiveness questions, is this dynamic between the PPP program and the EIDL program. So PPP, as we know, is much more narrowly focused on payroll. I mean, the intent was to help either keep people employed or bring them back off of unemployment if they were already let go. EIDL, on the other hand, is a working capital loan. You can use it for pretty much any business purpose, any business expenses. It does not have as narrow of a focus. You can pay payroll out of it as well. And you are also eligible to apply for both programs. We just ask that you not use the proceeds for the same purpose. So what a lot of businesses have done, especially if they have a fair number of employees, is to use the PPP program exclusively for their payroll costs, and then using the EIDL loan proceeds for all those other expenses that they may have. The EIDL program, unlike PPP, does not have any sort of forgivable component to it. It is a regular term loan. For nonprofits, it's quite favorable because the interest rate is 2.75%, and it's a 30-year maturity, and we are deferring payments for 12 months. So it's a pretty favorable loan, even though it does have to be repaid, and there are no prepayment penalties. So both programs.
I just have one quick question. I'm jumping in already,
Sure.
but the question that's relevant to the PPP and the EIDL and some of the things you were saying. And so you're saying that if people have an EIDL and a PPP and are using the PPP for payroll, that portion could still be forgivable even if they have an EIDL as well?
Yes. Yes.
Great. Okay.
So
we'll get
as
into
long,
that.
yeah.
Great.
Right. As long as you use the PPP loan proceeds for the approved items, which we'll talk in more depth in a few minutes, and you stay in the same ratio, this 60-40 split, use at least 60% of the proceeds on payroll costs, you can be eligible for forgiveness. And so, like I said, if you do get both loans and you have a need for both, I do recommend that people make sure they're keeping them separate as far as what they're spending the proceeds on. And when it comes to the forgiveness side, you may have to demonstrate and show that. So, but we're going to talk a little bit more about documentation and some things to be cognizant of in the PPP forgiveness process. But I just wanted to quickly show both. Because I know many of you probably did apply for both programs. So the Flexibilities Act. So just to give a little bit more background. So the Flexibilities Act, when it was passed in June, made some changes to the regular PPP program. But I think these are largely changes for the benefit of most of the PPP recipients. So the covered period, that was the period of time to spend the funds. The covered period was actually extended. So it went from 8 weeks to 24 weeks. So if you applied prior to the Flexibilities Act, you actually have a choice. You can stick with that 8-week covered period that you had originally, or if you're having trouble bringing people back, or you need to cease operations, we've been in the start-stop mode, then you can opt in for the 24 weeks. The choice is yours. For those people who applied after the Flexibility Act, you automatically received the 24 weeks as your covered period.
Now, we have a lot of questions about this, and I know you're going to be getting into it in more detail, but can folks choose a time period between 8 and 24 weeks if they want to?
Essentially, yes, because what you'll see, I think I have it on a later slide, is that if you're in the 24-week covered period and you use up all the funds, all the PPP funds by week, 15, yes, you can go ahead and apply for forgiveness at that point in time. You don't have to wait for the full 24 weeks to expire. It's essentially 8 weeks or whenever you use up the funds. That's kind of the short way to think about it. What changed with this is, I think, as everyone knows, under PPP, the amount of funding, the amount you could pay each employee was capped at $100,000 annualized. So over an 8-week period, that $100,000 annualized is $15,385. If you're looking at the 24-week period, it goes up to $20,833. The other thing that changed was the ratio. This is the ratio of payroll costs to non-payroll costs. It's now a little bit more favorable for the non-payroll costs, and now you have to use at least 60% of the proceeds on your payroll costs and no more than 40% on the approved non-payroll costs. The other big change in the Flexibility Act was what we call a safe harbor provision. So it kind of expanded the safe harbor provisions. And what these do is they basically do not penalize you, so to speak, if certain conditions are not met. They don't penalize you on the ability to have your loan forgiven. So there's two primary circumstances that can happen. One, this one existed before, but is if you can't rehire all of your employees, or you can't find a similarly qualified person to replace that employee, fill that FTE spot, you are not necessarily going to be penalized. Your loan forgiveness won't necessarily be reduced. You can document this. So this is if you called up your employees and offered them their positions back and they declined for any number of reasons. We just need you to document and substantiate that you couldn't replace them and to get back to your pre-February 15th FTE level. The other situation has to do more with the conditions, the health conditions in wherever you're located. So if you are not able to return to your pre-February 15th, so pre-COVID world business activities by the end of the calendar year as a result of the COVID-19 health impact, so health department shutting you down or shutting down your classification of businesses, or it could be a state order, any sort of health-related reason why, COVID-19 related health reason why you can't return to business activity, normal business activity, is also not going to penalize you on your loan forgiveness. The other thing that changed was the mature, I'm sorry?
Really, can I jump in for just a sec? Yeah, we have a lot of questions about this. In the nonprofit world, there are many arts institutions, for example, and other kinds of institutions that have not been able to reopen and probably won't be able to reopen for the duration. So they would be able to use this safe harbor and document. What's the best way to document? Or will you get into that later?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about documentation. For this particular issue, because it is so fluid, what I've been recommending to people is, whether it's wherever the guidance is coming from, whether it's your county health department, whether it's the state, the governor's office, or CDC. I think most of it's going to be state and local, but I would either download, if it's a document with a date stamp on it, you can download to show what the conditions are and the prohibitions against opening, or if it's a screenshot on the health department's website, for example, and date stamp it, because I would recommend you do this at periodic intervals to show that, from whatever date you got your loan to December 31st, you are not able to reopen your business because of these health department orders. And because they're subject to change, as we've already seen, some openings and then closings again, I would do periodic screenshots from the website, or if they have a downloadable file, I would download it and archive it.
Great. We have a question going back to the calculation of going from 8 weeks to 24 weeks. And some of the people who are commenting in the chat and Q&A are saying that the cap would be closer to 46,000. And could you just say a little bit more about how those two numbers were determined, the 8 weeks and the 24 weeks? I think that would help folks.
I am actually just taking it directly from the rules. So
Okay.
it's I have to see if I can find the calculation. It's
That's okay. You don't have to do it now, but
yeah, it's in
okay.
the rules. So there's a way to get to 40,000, but it's the issue is that remember when you got the loan, when you applied for it, nothing changed in the calculation for how you applied and how much you were eligible for. So you were only eligible for 8 weeks of payroll, period. So mathematically, it's not possible to pay people the $40,000 unless you are not bringing your employees back or they can't come back for some reason. So we could get into this weird math game, but just remember the limitations are as such because when you applied for the loan, and even if you apply today, you are still limited to only applying for 8 weeks worth of payroll. You're not going to have the funds to pay literally 24 weeks of full payroll. So if you're looking at the math equation, 8 weeks divided by whatever your FTE over 24 weeks, and that's using 100%, I think, of your PPP proceeds on payroll, you can get to typically the 20,000. That said, if you aren't able to bring back all of your employees, and you can document it and you're covered by the safe harbor provisions, you may be able to pay them a little bit more, but you wouldn't be able to pay 100% of your FTEs at the $40,000 level because mathematically you're just not going to have enough funds in you wouldn't have been issued enough funds, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Wonderful.
Yeah. So the other thing, and this has raised a lot of questions, is the loan maturity. So originally it was just 2 years because they were expecting that majority of the funds would be forgiven, but it has now also been extended to 5 years. So if you applied after the Flexibility Act was enacted, you automatically got the 5-year maturity. For those of you who had applied before the Flexibility Act came into existence, you have the 2-year maturity. That said, you can go talk to your lender if you would like to. If you don't think all of your loan is going to be forgiven and portion of it will be rolled into a term loan, you can ask your lender if you can go have a 5-year maturity date. And upon mutual agreement between you and your lender, both parties have to agree, they can extend your maturity date to 5 years. So again, if you got your loan earlier in the process and you're under the 2-year maturity and want to extend it out because you know you're going to have a term loan after the forgiveness process, you can have that conversation with your lender.
That was a question that a lot of people had, so really appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. The other piece is on the deferral, and this gets a little complicated. So the simple thing is to know is that the deferral period for when you have to start repaying on that term loan, regardless of whether you have the 2-year or the 5-year maturity, has been extended out even further. What your exact date will be is a factor of what covered period you have, 8 weeks, 24 weeks, or something in between, when you apply for forgiveness, and when SBA remits forgiveness back to the lender. So everybody on this call, this webinar, could potentially have a different deferral date. So rather than get into a lot of calculations, just suffice it to know, the bottom line is whatever your deferral date was initially, the 6 months, it's going to be longer than that now, even if you don't apply for forgiveness for whatever reason. There's a couple things that didn't change with the Flexibilities Act, and as of today, the 23rd of July, Congress has not taken any action to make these changes either. That includes the eligibility. So that has been actually a topic of conversation with a lot of nonprofit organizations, because as you know, the CARES Act limited the nonprofit eligibility to 501c3s and 501c19s. And that stays the same. Use of the proceeds has not changed. That initial calculation on how much you're eligible to borrow has not changed. And the fact that there's only one loan per business has not changed. So let's talk a little bit about forgiveness. There has been some, I won't call them changes, but there was an introduction of an easy form on the application, the forgiveness application. So this is, I think, a really great enhancement. I think everybody under the sun asked Treasury to come up with an easy form application, which they did. So there are actually 2 forgiveness applications out there. If you go to treasury.gov or to sba.gov, you'll see they're calling it Form 3508 and then 3508 Easy. So the Easy form is available for people who are self-employed with no employees, which, since I think we largely have nonprofits on the call today, I don't know that many people would fall into that bucket. But the other one is, it's a very lengthy explanation, and you can read the actual language on the form itself. But the bottom line is if you didn't make any changes to your number of FTEs, didn't reduce their pay by more than 25%, kept their average hours basically the same, you basically can qualify for the Easy form. And this includes accounting a safe harbor provision applies. So the shortest way I tell people to think about it is if you basically are continuing business operations as normal as far as the number of employees and what you're paying them and the average hours they're working, subject to a safe harbor provision, then you would probably qualify to use the Easy form. Similarly, this new safe harbor, if you basically kept your people and didn't reduce their pay by more than 25%, but you couldn't return to your normal operating levels pre-COVID, you can also qualify. So I don't want to necessarily take the time to sit and read the provisions because they are a little lengthy, but I do encourage you to sit down and read. There are 3 situations, and I think a lot of businesses are going to qualify for one of those 3 situations. If you don't, for whatever reason, qualify for the situations on the Easy form, then you do need to use the longer form. Documentation. So I know we've had some questions about that. So my basic advice is obviously document everything. Try to keep track of all payroll records, utility bills, and then also any correspondence. Email is fine, but any correspondence you have with employees, especially if you're trying to rehire them and they're not deciding not to come back for any number of reasons. That is said, this is just a tip. It's not a requirement, but it is a tip so that you have a paper trail. You might have conversations with employees, but then I would also follow up with an email to say that you are offering them the job back. And if they are declining, they can send back an email to you that says, I am not going to be returning, for whatever the reason is.
So that email would count as adequate documentation then for employees who are choosing not to come back.
Right. So you'll have that that you extended their job to them and they decided they're not coming back. You'll have that papered, and then also it'll be coupled with your payroll documentation. You'll show a reduction obviously in your payroll because this 1, 2, or 3, whatever employees decided they're not coming back. So couple those 2 together, you can document that you could qualify for that safe harbor provision because you did do, what your intent was to bring everybody back, and they didn't come back for any number of reasons.
Right.
And the other thing is if, this is, I don't know, it's kind of interesting to see what kind of hiring environment we're in. I'm actually going to be, hopefully, knock on wood, hiring in a couple months myself. So it's interesting to see what the market's doing. But if you're not able to rehire or hire new bodies for those positions, keep track of that documentation, whatever that documentation might look like as well. Just in an abundance of caution, I would recommend you just keep everything. One tip is if you're talking to your employees over the phone and either not able to email with them or they don't respond via email for some reason, my recommendation is to do your own written contemporaneous memo, memo to yourself, memo to the file that said you talked to so-and-so employee on this date and time, you extended their job to them under the same conditions, same salary, same number of hours. They have declined to come back, and note the reason, and keep your own record if you're not able to do an email or any other sort of written correspondence with that employee. That way you'll have everything documented and you won't have to rely on your powers of recall, 24 weeks later when your covered period might end. So let me show you, and likewise what we talked about too, was for that safe harbor provision about not being able to return to your normal business operating levels, because it might be harder to prove, 24 plus weeks out from now, or in December at the end of the calendar year. I would recommend you going in, and as soon as like a new order comes out from your health department or from the governor's office, keep that somehow, whether it's through screenshots or if it's a downloadable PDF with a date stamp on it. And we download and make sure you keep all of that. When you do look at either of the applications for forgiveness, there's the application itself, but then there's also an instructions document that accompanies both of them. And on that instructions document, this is the section, this is an abbreviation. It was much wordier and it wouldn't fit all on the slide. But this is what they recommend, or they tell you need to maintain. You may or may not have to submit all of this to the lender, but it is incumbent upon you as the borrower who is seeking forgiveness to at least maintain adequate records. And that includes your payroll documentation, whatever that is for you. If you use a service to do your payroll, that's great. You can keep those records. If you do it yourselves, if it's an account transfer from one account to their account, their checking account, whatever documentation you have and you use for your process. To show that you paid people and how much you paid them and when you paid them, keep all of that. And I recommend just, maybe making your own separate file so that the documents that are relevant to you during your covered period are readily available and accessible.
Do you also recommend that the funds be kept in a separate account? Do you have a position on that?
It's up to you. I think there's no requirement that you have to put it in a separate account. If that makes life easier for you, then by all means, please keep it in a separate account. For people that have, if there's some larger nonprofits on here that have a lot of employees and a lot of payroll records, maybe it's easier if you do it that way. For those of you that are smaller nonprofits and maybe you only have a handful of people on payroll, maybe you don't need to. It's really up to you, and I don't think everybody's situation is the same. So I think it's whatever makes your life easier and makes it easier for you to track how you're spending that particular pot of funds. Yeah, and so I know there's I've heard some CPAs and others out there saying establish a separate account, but from SBA and Treasury's perspective, that's not a requirement. If that's a best practice that works for you, great. But if not, that's okay too. And then obviously, hopefully this goes without saying, but keep all of the documentation from when you applied for the loan, copy the application if it's possible. Some of you might have done it through an online web portal where maybe you don't have a nice clean printout, but you should have your loan documents, closing documents. So keep everything.
Great, thanks, Julie. We had a question going back to employees that leave. What about accrued vacation time for employees who leave? How would that
You mean paying out the accrued vacation time? If they're already off the payroll, I guess if they're already off the payroll, I'm not sure. Well, it's interesting because the definitions of payroll costs do definitely include vacation leave and stuff like that. And it has to be either incurred, I think it's incurred and or paid. So if you pay it during the covered period, based on the definition, it should qualify. So it's one of those things you can look at when things are incurred and or when they're paid. It doesn't have to be both necessarily. So in theory, it probably could qualify. But again, I would look at how you do your record keeping and how you account for it in your records.
Okay.
Because I know some organizations might pay everybody out as soon as they leave. Others may do it over time, especially if it's a large sum of money. So I guess I would defer to how you're doing your payroll and making sure you're just following your normal practices. And if it's paid during the covered period, that covered period is your important period of time, then you, per the definition that's in the application, you should be able to count that.
Great. And will you define covered period again for folks? Is that in one of your slides, or can you do that?
Sure. It's essentially the if you Flexibilities Act, it was the 8 weeks that started when you received your loan, when you received the loan proceeds, out for 8 weeks. Now it is up to 24 weeks. So it's still, the clock still starts from the date when you receive the loan proceeds, and then it goes out either the 8 weeks or the 24 weeks. If you haven't already spent all of the funds, if you are one of the very early PPP people, applicants, and you were at that time it was only 8 weeks, and so you pretty much planned for that 8 weeks, and you got to the, you're at the end or about to be at the end of your 8 weeks. For some of those people, the 24-week extension maybe doesn't matter. For those of you who were struggling during that 8-week period, you might want to opt for that 24 to give yourself the cushion, the cover. Like we said earlier, if you don't have to necessarily wait till the end of the 24 weeks before you submit for your forgiveness, because in this slide we'll talk about the process a little bit. Okay. So the application, everybody who wants to seek forgiveness is going to have to complete an application. So the forms are available from download from SBA.gov and from Treasury.gov, or some of the banks, these are probably the larger banking institutions, may put up an online forgiveness application, similar to when you applied, some banks automated the process and put up an online application. They may do that for forgiveness as well, but all of the fields, all the information should be identical. The formatting might look a little different, but all of the information should be identical. So you're going to have to submit a forgiveness application to your lender. And you can submit that application after your covered period ends, or as soon as all your funds are spent. So the soonest would be 8 weeks, or the longest would be the 24 weeks, plus I think you get another 60 days in order to apply. So again, as soon as all the funds are spent, you are eligible basically to apply for forgiveness. You're going to submit your application to the lender. The lender's going to do at least a cursory review of it. They may request additional documentation, especially if they need to verify some payroll expenses or something else. They have the right to request additional documentation, which is why I recommended beginning, keep everything. As soon as the lender reviews it and approves it, it gets sent to SBA. And SBA we'll take a look at that, and as soon as SBA approves it, what SBA is then going to do is basically pay the lender. So at that point, whatever the forgiveness portion is, SBA is going to pay the lender. So no money will be coming back to the business, obviously, because your benefit is, so to speak, is just not having to make payments. But remember, this is not an all or nothing game, right? It's not either 0 or 100% forgiveness. It could be a portion thereof. So if you, one, opt not to seek forgiveness, or if you two do seek forgiveness, but a portion of it cannot be forgiven, it'll automatically be converted into a term loan under the same term. So everybody gets 1% interest. It'll be either the 2-year or the 5-year term, and it will be deferred for 10 plus months, depending on your dates and timeline. So again, your application has to go to the lender. The lender then will submit to SBA, and SBA will then pay the forgiveness portion to the lender. If your 100% is forgiven, you're pretty much done.
Okay, great. That's everybody's goal, I think.
Yes, I think so.
Quick question, and I think this must just be rumor, but some people were asking if you have a small loan, like under 150,000, you still have to go through the forgiveness application process. When you said everybody, you meant everybody.
I mean, everybody, you know, even I think the smallest loan I saw personally under PPP was about $5,000. Even that person is going to have to apply.
Right.
Now, presumably they'll be able to use the easy one, which is very easy. But yes, every person who would like forgiveness must apply.
Great.
Okay, so just a quick refresher on what is forgivable. And so basically it's two pots, payroll costs and non-payroll costs. Your payroll costs are obviously the compensation, the salary, wages, tips, if that's applicable to you. Nonprofit world, probably not, but and then also any employer's payments of benefits for whether it's like health coverage, if you have a retirement plan, leave options, that was one of the prior questions. Only thing you can't put in here is if you are getting leave credits under the FFCRA. Those leave, you can't get both the leave credit on your taxes plus it paid for under PPP. It's one or the other. And that's only with regards to leave subject to the FFCRA. But otherwise, regular leave programs, if any costs associated with that, can fall under this. And likewise, any state and local taxes assessed on employees' compensation. Federal taxes, no, but state and local taxes, yes.
Can you unpack the loan under the leave programs under the Act that would not be covered again? So the FFCRA, just for folks who may not know the acronym, spelling out the acronym isn't important, but just what leave that includes.
Yeah. So that was an enhanced leave for COVID-19, like an enhanced sick leave program for like whether people might have to themselves been diagnosed or had to care for family members. It was an enhanced leave program, basically an enhanced sick leave program. And businesses could get a tax credit for giving this enhanced leave to their employees. So it's much more narrowly targeted and focused, and it's in the CARES Act. So if you're not familiar with it, you could go, probably if you type it into a search engine, it'll pop right up. But if I don't remember the section it's in off the top of my head, I'd have to, because the CARES Act was pretty voluminous. But if you're not sure what that is, if you have, an accountant or a CPA that helps you, I would ask them. If not, you can reach out to us at SBA, and we can help pinpoint the section for you so that you can read the exact language. But it's one of those, it's like they don't want it to look like a double dip, getting a tax credit plus getting it paid for essentially under the PPP program.
Speaking of double dipping, Julie, we have a lot of questions about grants and how they dovetail with having the payroll portions forgiven. So I don't know whether you want to address that now or you want to wait. I know you still have a lot to get through.
Let me just cover the non-payroll costs, and then we
Great.
can talk about that a little bit. So the non-payroll costs are also very narrowly focused. It is mortgage interest if you own your own building for your business, for the nonprofit, or rent, or utilities. And the utilities I listed here are the utilities that are listed in the loan forgiveness application. So it's fairly broad. It's your what I would consider your standard probably utilities. If you're in a unique industry and may have some sort of unique expenses that you're trying to pinpoint or put in the utilities bucket, my recommendation is to talk to your lender and to get their feedback, because the lender is a very important partner in not only giving you the loan, because they issue the loan, but also in the forgiveness side of it. So if it's something that falls outside of this realm of what's listed here, I would recommend your first conversation be with the lender. If that's not getting you the answers or they're not certain, the lenders even have the ability to reach out for SBA to help them with some policy decisions as well. So you can work through the lenders or you can work through the SBA channels if you're looking for a policy decision, but hopefully those are few and far between questions. So the question you had about the grants, are we talking about grants that are from other sources, not as like from HUD or from another organization or government?
Yes.
Or
Let me ask a couple of questions in this area, and then we'll.
okay.
Okay. So one was, can we use the labor expense used in the forgiveness calculation if it is reimbursable by either a state or local government grant? If the position.
Yeah. I don't believe that there's anything, I'd have to double check in the rule myself to see if there's anything specific on that. But and this is my gut reaction, is that the answer is probably no, because it is covered by another source. But obviously everybody's going to have unique situations. So I would say if you're not certain, we might want to take that conversation offline, because I could see a lot of different hypotheticals playing out from that. One might be is if you had a grant and you had the funds and the funds were not in jeopardy, they didn't get postponed or delayed or canceled or taken away from you. I'm not so sure that you could do the quote double dip, especially if it's from a federal source of funds like HUD or Economic Development Agency or even USDA or some of the other federal agencies that provide a lot of grant support. But if it's a situation where the grant was either pulled or they ceased funding it for any number of reasons, then maybe you have a better argument and it fits the scenario and intent of PPP. But in that case, I would want to double check the rules, because off the top of my head, I'm not recalling that this specific situation is outlined, but there's a lot of rules and I don't necessarily have them all committed to memory. So I would definitely double check the rules first, and then we can look at that exact scenario and see where we think it'll fit given the policy directives we do have.
Okay, so it's possible that for state and local government contracts that there might be a possibility of having a portion of it forgiven, particularly if there was a delay in payment on those contracts or grants.
Yeah, I mean, I think whatever documentation you have from your grant source that says like we're postponing award, or we're not going to award this year, or we're whatever situation it is, obviously keep all of that documentation, and that's part of the conversation you'll have with the lender as well, to say, listen, I have a unique scenario, and I have documentation to show that this funding source that normally covered my employees is no longer in existence, at least for your covered period. So I'm using PPP instead.
Okay. And then so the potential for double dipping, that would also be the case for restricted private grants coming from like foundations that cover payroll?
Sorry.
Go ahead, Jan, if you want to jump in.
I've heard other discussions that doesn't. For example, if you're a store and you get customers paying for things, that isn't the issue, right? Or a restaurant, customers paying. So private payments to nonprofits do not obviate, do not eliminate your ability to use PPP funds.
Right, it shouldn't necessarily eliminate it. The only thing I would be really mindful of is another federal source. But other than that, yeah, I think it should. Again, I would double check, so it never hurts to double check with your lender, but it probably, I don't think it'll jeopardize the forgiveness portion. But we can, again, have those conversations with your lender to make sure, because there could be nuances in different people's situations. So I hate to kind of overgeneralize, but yeah, for the most part, it shouldn't. I don't think it'll make an impact if it's from a private foundation. No. So I know we're getting close on time, so I'm not gonna go through, this is just an illustration, what's up in front of you from the forgiveness for the easy form, to show you it really is pretty easy, because what I have recreated here is the extent of the math that you need to do for the forgiveness application for the easy form. And it's really just putting in what you spent for payroll costs, what you spent for the non-payroll expenses that are applicable, and then comparing that lump sum to what you got for your PPP loan against a simple calculation of multiplying your payroll costs by 0.06. And then you take whatever amount is the smallest, and that is the amount that is forgiven. So in this hypothetical situation in front of us, it's very simple math. They had a $100,000 PPP loan, and they spent $75,000 on payroll, $25,000 on non-payroll. It added up to 100. So in this case, this hypothetical borrower got 100% of their loan forgiven. This is where I have a lot of resources, and so I'm just going to fly through this. I'm not going to outline this, but there's a lot of rules out there. You can find them all on SBA.gov or Treasury.gov. What I tried to do is capture the ones that are more relevant to forgiveness and the different forgiveness questions you might have. So this is hopefully all of them, but the full list is on the websites. And just for those of you in the Bay Area, you can feel free to reach out to my team. If you're not in the Bay Area and want to get connected with either your local SBA or another source, please feel free to reach out to us too, and I can try to make sure you're connected with your local resource. For SBA, we are across the state of California, well, across the country, but we actually have 6 offices in California. So we are, if you're not in the Bay Area North, we can help connect you with your local SBA office as well. And I'm going to stop sharing so that we can go.
Did you want to go look at the form a little bit, or what's your thinking about?
I can show you really quickly. Let me close this one
down. I think it would be helpful.
Okay, yeah. This is just the easy form. So you can see, obviously it's labeled, and it's fairly straightforward. That the upper portion is going to just be your demographic data.
We're not seeing it yet, so I don't know if.
Oh, you're not seeing it? Oh,
yeah.
You know what? I stopped sharing. Hold on.
Yes.
Let me go back. Let's go. Okay. Hopefully now it's there.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the easy form. And like I said, the top part is just a lot of demographic data, and then your payroll schedule. But the math, if you will, the forgiveness calculation, I can even fit it all in one screen. It's exactly what I just showed you in the slide. So your payroll costs, you just itemize all the expenses from your covered period, and then enter in the loan amount, enter in the lump sum, and then do a very simple calculation. For payroll costs, 60% requirement, you're just literally going to take or divide line 1, so whatever your payroll costs that you entered here, your lump sum, divide it by the 0.6, whatever that number is, you enter it here. And then your forgiveness portion is whichever of these 3 numbers between line 5, 6, and 7, whichever of those is the smallest, you enter here, and that is the forgiveness amount. So that's what's, and hopefully for most people, it'll end up being 100%. Hopefully this line right here, line 6, your PPP loan amount is hopefully the smallest, and you have 100% of it forgiven. The rest of this application is just some of the certifications about eligibility, that you agree you spent the money in the appropriate manner, and then the signature box at the end. Also has some optional demographic data to capture. This is optional. And there is, I think I'm on the Treasury site right now, so let me go back. There's also, you can see there's the application. There's also the instructions. So I do recommend, whether you're doing the easy form or the other form, that you do read through the instructions. When we were talking about who qualifies for the easy form, as soon as you pull up the instructions, you see this gray box. Might be really hard to read right now, but whoops. But that is, whoops, trying to zoom in here. This is the information you're going to want to read to make sure you qualify for the easy form. And there's the 3 different ways you can qualify, and you're just going to check the box to make sure you fit one of those categories. If you do, yay, you can proceed and use the easy form. And the instructions are great because it does give you some definitions. It does talk a little bit more about the covered period. There's this alternate covered period if you have a biweekly or more frequent payroll. You can slide your start date a little bit to align with your payroll period. But it also provides some definitions. And a lot of what I put in the slide deck, I literally grabbed from here or from the rules, but it's a little bit easier to just kind of refer back to it here. But it's going to walk you through the lines, what to enter. It's going to talk to you a bit more about payroll costs, non-payroll costs, and the calculations. So, and then here at the bottom of the form, it's talking about those documents that it asks that each borrower retain. They may or may not be submitted, but again, asking borrowers to retain this paperwork. And so this is a little bit more detailed than what I was able to put on the slide. The other form, the regular application form, is also available here. It is not changed significantly from when it was first put out back in June. But again, the instructions I think are really important, so I would recommend you read those and then tackle the application. Whoops, sorry, down here. So this is, I'm actually on the Treasury site right now, only because I think I like personally the way Treasury has laid out their site to help you find the documentation, has the applications and other things you might need, but then it also has links in a pretty clear way to all the rules. So when I told you there's a lot of rules, I wasn't kidding. But I tried to highlight for you largely the last half of it from pretty much here down, from here down, are going to relate to forgiveness. So the other form is really lengthy. I don't really want to, we could spend the next 3 hours probably trying to go through it.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That gives people a sense. Yeah. So in talking about the covered period, it sounds like there's a little bit of flexibility. We had a question about if your covered period starts in the middle of a pay period, can you still count the entire pay period as long as the checks are issued during the covered period?
Yeah, so different ways to look at that. So if you pay every 2 weeks, you can glide, it's my word, not the word in the application, but kind of glide your start date, if you will, to align with your pay period. But if you pay monthly, you can't do that. But if you pay biweekly or weekly, you can do that. So let's say you got your loan and you got the funds dispersed on a Wednesday, but your pay period for your employees starts the following Monday. You could kind of wait and then count that Monday forward for your 8 weeks or your 24 weeks, whichever one you're electing. And that way it aligns nicely with your payroll cycle. For people who pay monthly, sorry, you don't have that option, but then you could look at it either way, right? It's funds either incurred or paid during that covered period. So you could, looking at what aligns, what makes sense for you, if you want to prorate it or if you want to count what's paid and then what's incurred. So
okay, great. We have a question about the non-payroll portion. Equipment lease costs, would they count towards the other 40% if you have to lease equipment?
The way it's written, I don't believe so. But again, if you are not certain, if you think it might fall into this nebulous utility expense, you might want to, I would talk to your lender and see what their read is on it. And if the lender, like I said, if the lender's really not certain either, the lenders have a channel to talk to SBA and get policy decisions as well.
Okay. And folks are wondering if they can use all of their loan for payroll and have it be forgiven. 100%.
Yes. Yeah, the 60% is like a minimum, so you can certainly use more.
Okay, good. Well, I am looking at the time, and we have gotten to a lot of questions. We have not gotten to all of the questions by any means, but I want to respect people's time. It's great having these questions. We will review all of the questions in the Q&A box, and perhaps we'll want to do a follow-up webinar or some kind of follow-up to get the additional information to people. So we can put our heads together and think about that, but there will be a follow-up email for people with Julie's PowerPoint. Thank you so much to you, Julie, for your time and expertise, and for letting us ask questions as we went along. People have a lot of questions.
I know there's a lot of questions out there. And so, I mean, it depends on, the banks, but I do recommend people, make sure they are trying to talk to their lender, because they are a very important piece in this equation as well. But I know the questions will continue, so we'll work with you, Lucy, and your team to try to get people the answers they need.
Wonderful, and really appreciate you sharing contact information too. That'll be great.
Sure.
So before we sign off, I just wanted to again thank our tech team also, Christina Dragonetti and Karina Paredes Arzola, and also encourage people, if you aren't a member, please join Cal Nonprofits, and you have the benefit of a discount today, 20% discount on your first year of membership with the discount code at the bottom of the screen here, COVID-19. So there are a lot of great benefits you can gain from being a member with Cal Nonprofits. So again, Julie, want to thank you so much for your time and expertise, and we will be following up with everybody with some additional information. Have a great day.
Thank you.